dear traveler, to a journey unlike any other. A tale of ancient magic, fierce battles, and the unyielding courage of heroes who faced the darkness to save their world. Over the next hour, you will be transported to the mystical realm of Illyria, where the balance of life itself hangs by a thread. This epic story, told in 7 captivating parts, follows the quest to restore the eternal flame, the very heart of the world, as our heroes confront the malevolent sorcerer Morvath, whose dark power threatens to engulf all that is good and pure. As you prepare to embark on this adventure, we invite you to immerse yourself fully. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, activate the notification bell, and join the conversation in the comments below. Your support is the flame that keeps our stories burning bright, so don't forget to like this video and share it with others who love epic tales of heroism and magic. Now, find a quiet place, put on your headphones, and let yourself be carried away by the words and images that will unfold before you. Breathe deeply, relax, and let your imagination take flight as we guide you through the enchanted world of Illyria. Watch closely as the story comes to life, and allow yourself to be drawn into the vivid landscapes and the epic struggle that lies at the heart of the covenant of the eternal flame. The journey is about to begin, and it promises to be an hour of wonder, adventure, and unforgettable storytelling. The Covenant of the Eternal Flame. Part 1. The Gathering Storm. In the ancient realm of Illyria, where time seemed to move with the slow, deliberate grace of the gods themselves, 4 mighty kingdoms stood in harmonious balance. These kingdoms, each tied to a primal element: fire, water, earth, and air, had for centuries maintained a fragile peace. At the heart of this peace was the eternal flame, a mystical force that bound the elements together, ensuring that no single kingdom could dominate the others. The flame, divided into 4 fragments, was entrusted to each kingdom, a covenant of unity and power. But peace, as history has often shown, is a delicate thing, easily shattered by the ambitions of mortals. The kingdom of embers, governed by the ruthless yet charismatic King Theron, was a land of searing heat and blazing deserts. Its people were as fierce as the flames they revered, their spirits unyielding and their hearts burning with a desire for conquest. It was here, in the great citadel of Pyros, that the first piece of the eternal flame was kept, a shard of unimaginable power that fueled the kingdom's dominance. Theron, however, was not content. The king, driven by a vision of an empire that would span the entirety of Illyria, began to harbor dark thoughts. Why should embers share its might with the lesser kingdoms? Why should the flame, a source of such unrivaled strength, be divided? And so, the storm began to gather. In the deep, moonless night, under the watchful gaze of the stars, a shadowy figure slipped through the gates of Pyros. Cloaked in darkness, the figure moved with the silent grace of a predator, unseen by the sentinels who stood guard. Within the sanctum of the flame, the figure paused, gazing at the shard that flickered with an otherworldly light, a light that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the world itself. A hand reached out, and in a single, fluid motion, the shard was taken. The theft was discovered at dawn. The kingdom erupted in chaos, the once unshakable faith of the people crumbling as word spread like wildfire. Someone had stolen the flame. King Theron, his fury as hot as the deserts of embers, vowed to hunt down the thief and reclaim what was his. But even as he swore his vengeance, a seed of doubt was planted in his heart. Who could have breached the sacred vault? Who had the audacity and the power to challenge the might of embers? Unbeknownst to Theron, the theft was but the first move in a grander, more sinister game. A game that would plunge Illyria into a conflict unlike any it had ever known. Far to the north, in the kingdom of tides, the ocean waves crashed against the cliffs in a symphony of nature's raw power. Here, in the city of Aquarius, the second shard of the eternal flame was kept, guarded by the enigmatic and wise Queen Seraphine. The people of tides were as fluid and adaptable as the waters they commanded. Their society one of harmony and introspection. Queen Seraphine, upon hearing of the theft, was troubled. The balance was beginning to unravel, and with it, the peace that had held the kingdoms together for so long. She knew that the loss of a single shard could have catastrophic consequences. Without the flame's unity, the elemental forces would spiral out of control, wreaking havoc across Illyria. As Seraphine pondered the implications, emissaries from the Kingdom of Stone arrived. The earthbound people of Stone, led by the stalwart King Arik, were known for their resilience and strength. Their shard of the eternal flame was hidden deep within the mountains, protected by the very earth itself. But even the unyielding stone could not prevent the whispers of war from reaching Arik's ears. Arik, ever the pragmatist, saw the theft as a sign, a harbinger of the conflict to come. He sent word to Seraphine, urging her to prepare for the worst. The alliance between stone and tides had been strong for generations, and Arik knew that together they might stand a chance against whatever force sought to destabilize their world. But as the kingdoms began to rally, one by one, there was one force that remained silent: the kingdom of skies, the most elusive and mysterious of them all. Ruled by the ethereal Queen Lunara, Skies was a land of high peaks and endless winds, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with magic. Lunara, with her command of the winds and the storms, was a figure of legend, a being as untouchable as the clouds that swirled around her citadel. Yet, even she could not ignore the tremors that now shook the foundations of Illyria. As the remaining shards of the eternal flame burned brightly in their respective kingdoms, a new and terrifying presence began to make itself known, a dark force that moved through the shadows, feeding on the chaos that had been unleashed. It was a power that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for the moment when the balance would be broken, when the kingdoms would be weakened by their own fear and mistrust. And now, that moment had come. As the dark clouds gathered on the horizon, each kingdom began to prepare for the inevitable conflict. Armies were raised, alliances forged, and ancient magics awakened. The covenant of the eternal flame, once a symbol of peace, had become a battleground, a prize that all would fight for, but only one could claim. In the heart of this gathering storm, a group of unlikely heroes began to form. A prince burdened by destiny, a queen torn between duty and desire, a warrior seeking redemption, and a sorceress with secrets as old as the world itself. Their paths, though divergent, would converge in a struggle that would determine the fate of Illyria. For the eternal flame was more than just a source of power. It was the heart of the world, the very essence of life itself. And as the shadows lengthened and the darkness grew, the flame's true nature would be revealed, a nature that could either save the world or destroy it, the covenant of the eternal flame. Part 2. The Shattered Alliances. The news of the stolen shard from the kingdom of embers spread across Illyria like a wildfire, igniting fear, suspicion, and a deep-seated anxiety among the remaining kingdoms. Each ruler, once a guardian of peace, now grappled with the encroaching darkness in their own way, knowing that the world as they knew it was on the brink of unraveling. In the kingdom of tides, Queen Seraphine convened her council in the grand hall of Aquarius. The walls, adorned with shimmering mosaics of underwater scenes, seemed to ripple with the queen's unease. Seraphine stood before her advisors, her long silver hair cascading like a waterfall down her back, her sea-green eyes reflecting the turmoil within her heart. "We cannot ignore what has happened in Embers," she began, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her. "The theft of their shard is not just an act of treason. It is an assault on the very balance of our world. We must assume that whoever has taken the flame will come for ours next." Her advisors, a mix of seasoned generals, wise scholars, and cunning diplomats, nodded in agreement. But among them, there was also fear. Fear that their peaceful kingdom, so reliant on the stability of the seas, would be the next target of this unseen threat. General Naida, a warrior whose prowess in battle was matched only by her loyalty to Seraphine, spoke up. "Your Majesty, we must strengthen our defenses. The seas are our greatest ally, but we cannot rely on them alone. If this enemy can breach the sanctum of Embers, they can reach us as well." Seraphine nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She had always been a queen of peace, guiding her people with wisdom and compassion. But now, faced with the prospect of war, she knew that she had to be more than just a ruler. She had to be a warrior, ready to defend her kingdom against the coming storm. "We will prepare," she said firmly. "Send word to King Arik. We must unite our forces and stand together against this threat. The covenant of the eternal flame must be preserved at all costs." Meanwhile, in the kingdom of stone, King Arik received Seraphine's message with a grim determination. The rugged landscape of his realm, with its towering mountains and deep valleys, had always been a fortress in itself. But Arik knew that no fortress was impenetrable, not when the enemy could be lurking within. Gathering his most trusted advisors in the Hall of Stone, a vast chamber carved into the heart of the mountains, Arik outlined his strategy. "The kingdom of tides stands with us, but we must be ready for anything. Our enemies are not just the other kingdoms. They are the forces that seek to tear us apart from within." His advisors, men and women forged by the harsh realities of their land, listened intently. Arik's leadership had always been grounded in strength and resilience. And now, more than ever, those qualities were needed. "We will fortify our borders, but we will also prepare to move. If the flame is threatened, we must be ready to strike." swiftly and decisively. Our kingdom is built on stone, but stone can crumble. We must not allow that to happen. As Arik spoke, his thoughts turned to the other rulers. Theron, driven by his ambition, was a dangerous man. Seraphine, though wise, might be too trusting in a time when trust could lead to ruin. And Lunara was an enigma, her motives as elusive as the winds she commanded. If they were to survive the coming conflict, they would need to be united. But Arik feared that unity was a dream, slipping further out of reach. In the kingdom of skies, high above the clouds, Queen Lunara gazed out from her citadel. The winds howled around her, carrying with them the whispers of the world below. She had sensed the disturbance long before the messages from the other kingdoms arrived. The balance was tipping, and with it, the very fabric of reality was beginning to fray. Lunara, with her piercing violet eyes and ethereal presence, had always been a figure of mystery. She moved like a wraith through the halls of her castle, her feet barely touching the ground. Many believed she was more spirit than flesh, a being of pure magic who had chosen to rule over the kingdom of skies. But even Lunara, with all her power and foresight, knew that this was a battle she could not fight alone. Summoning her most trusted advisor, the ancient sorcerer Zephyrus, Lunara spoke of the darkness she had felt encroaching upon their world. The flame is in danger, and with it, the fate of Illyria. We must prepare, but we must also be cautious. There are forces at play here that even I do not fully understand. Zephyrus, his long white beard flowing like a river of clouds, nodded thoughtfully. The other kingdoms will soon be at each other's throats, each fearing the other as much as they fear the darkness. If we are to survive, we must find a way to unite them. The flame must not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. Lunara agreed, but deep within her, a shadow of doubt began to grow. She had always been a queen of independence, ruling her kingdom with a detachment that bordered on isolation. Now she realized that very detachment could be their undoing. The time had come for the rulers of Illyria to meet, perhaps for the last time before the world was plunged into chaos. As the rulers made their preparations, the group of unlikely heroes began to form. Each kingdom sent forth its champion, warriors and mages, who would represent their people in the coming conflict. They were bound by duty, but also by the knowledge that the future of their world rested on their shoulders. From the kingdom of Embers came Prince Kale, a young man of fiery temperament and unyielding resolve. He carried with him the burden of his father's expectations, knowing that his every move would be watched and judged. Kale was driven by a desire to prove himself, to show that he was more than just the heir to a throne. He was a leader in his own right. The Kingdom of Tides sent forth General Nida, a warrior of unparalleled skill and loyalty. She was a woman of few words, but her actions spoke volumes. Nida had dedicated her life to protecting her people, and she would stop at nothing to ensure their safety. Her connection to the sea was deep and unbreakable, and she wielded its power with a grace that belied her formidable strength. From the Kingdom of Stone came the legendary warrior Arik, not the king himself, but a man who had once been his closest friend and advisor. Arik had fought in countless battles, his body marked by the scars of a lifetime of warfare. But beneath his grizzled exterior was a heart that still burned with the desire for justice. He had chosen to join this quest not out of loyalty to the crown, but out of a belief that the world deserved to be saved. Finally, from the Kingdom of Skies came the enigmatic sorceress Leora, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her power. Leora was a master of the winds, able to bend them to her will with a mere thought. But her true strength lay in her wisdom, a wisdom that had been honed over centuries of study and contemplation. Leora had seen the rise and fall of empires, and she knew that this was a battle that would require more than just brute strength. It would require cunning, strategy, and above all, a deep understanding of the forces at play. As these heroes gathered in the neutral city of Lethar, a place untouched by the conflicts of the past, they found themselves bound by a shared purpose, but also by a deep-seated mistrust. Each had been shaped by their own experiences, their own loyalties, and their own fears. And as they began to discuss their plans, it became clear that unity would be as difficult to achieve as victory itself. Kael, ever the firebrand, was quick to advocate for a direct assault on the forces of darkness. "We cannot afford to wait," he argued. "Every moment we delay gives our enemies more time to strengthen their hold. We must strike now with all the power we can muster." Naida, ever the strategist, countered with a more measured approach. Charging headlong into battle is a sure way to get ourselves killed. We need to gather more information, understand what we're up against, and plan our moves accordingly. Arik, the veteran warrior, agreed with Nida. I've seen too many battles lost because of rash decisions. We need to be smart about this, not just strong. Leora, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. The flame is more than just a weapon. It is the heart of our world, the source of all life. If we are to protect it, we must first understand it. There are forces at work here that go beyond the physical. We must be prepared to face them. The discussion was tense, but eventually a plan began to take shape. They would start by investigating the ruins of an ancient temple, a place where it was said that the flame had first been discovered. There, they hoped to find clues about their enemy, and perhaps even a way to restore the balance that had been lost. As they set out on their journey, the heroes knew that they were embarking on a path fraught with danger. But they also knew that they had no choice. The covenant of the eternal flame was at stake, and with it, the future of Illyria. And so, with the wind at their backs and the weight of the world on their shoulders, they began their quest, a quest that would take them to the farthest reaches of the realm, through trials and tribulations that would test their strength, their resolve, and their very souls. But even as they marched forward, the shadows continued to gather, and the darkness that had been unleashed showed no signs of abating. The flame was flickering, and with it, the hope of a world teetering on the edge of destruction. The covenant of the eternal flame. Part 3. The Veil of Shadows. The journey to the ancient temple was fraught with peril as the heroes ventured deeper into the heart of Illyria, where the boundaries between the known world and the unknown began to blur. The landscape around them shifted from the familiar to the eerie, vast forests where the trees seemed to whisper secrets, barren plains where the very air shimmered with unseen forces, and mountains that towered like the spires of forgotten gods. As they traveled, the tension among the group grew palpable. The weight of their mission, coupled with the mistrust that simmered just beneath the surface, threatened to pull them apart before they could even begin their true task. Prince Kael, ever impatient, found himself growing increasingly frustrated with the slow pace of their journey. His mind burned with thoughts of vengeance, his heart aflame with the desire to prove his worth. But as much as he longed to confront their enemies head-on, he knew that he could not do so alone. He needed the others as much as it pained him to admit it. General Nida, ever vigilant, kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. She had fought in many battles, but none had filled her with such a sense of foreboding as this one. The enemy they faced was unlike any she had encountered before, an enemy that lurked in the shadows, unseen but ever present. Naida knew that they were being watched, tracked by forces that moved beyond the reach of her senses. It was only a matter of time before the first strike came. Arik, the seasoned warrior, walked in silence. His thoughts turned inward. He had seen too much death, too much destruction in his long life. But this time felt different. This time, the stakes were higher than ever before. Arik could feel the weight of history bearing down on them. The echoes of battles long past whispering in his ears. He knew that their journey would be a defining moment, not just for them, but for the entire world. Leora, the sorceress from the Kingdom of Skies, moved with an otherworldly grace, her eyes ever on the horizon. She could sense the magic in the air, a deep and ancient power that pulsed beneath the surface of the land. It was a power that called to her, beckoning her to delve deeper, to uncover the truths that lay hidden in the shadows. But Leora also knew that such power came at a cost, and she was not yet ready to pay it. Their journey led them to the edge of a great forest, known in legend as the Vale of Shadows. It was said that within this forest, the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits was thin, and that those who entered often did not return. The trees here were ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their leaves dark and foreboding. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Kale was the first to speak as they stood at the edge of the forest, his voice tense with impatience. We have no time for hesitation. If this temple holds the answers we seek, then we must press on. Nida placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady and calm. Patience, Prince Kale. This forest is no ordinary place. We must be cautious. Rushing in blindly will only lead to our demise. Arik nodded in agreement. She's right. The Vale of Shadows is a place of great danger. We must tread carefully. Leora, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the forest, added, "There is magic here, ancient and powerful. We must be prepared for whatever we may encounter." With a reluctant nod, Kale conceded, and the group entered the forest. The moment they stepped beneath the canopy, the atmosphere changed. The light of the sun, once bright and warm, was muted, filtered through the dense foliage above. The shadows seemed to move and shift, as if alive, watching their every move. The air grew colder, and the silence was broken only by the distant rustle of leaves, a sound that seemed to echo from all directions at once. As they moved deeper into the forest, the path became less clear, the trees closing in around them like sentinels guarding a forbidden secret. The forest was a labyrinth, designed to confuse and disorient those who dared to enter. But the heroes pressed on, guided by a sense of purpose that burned brighter than their fear. Hours passed, though it felt like days, and still they found no sign of the temple. The shadows grew darker, more oppressive, and the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the forest itself was testing them, probing their weaknesses, searching for a way to break their resolve. Then, without warning, the first strike came. From the darkness, shadowy figures emerged, beings that seemed to be made of the very essence of the forest, their forms shifting and ethereal. They moved with unnatural speed, attacking with a ferocity that caught the group off guard. Kale was the first to react, drawing his sword in a flash of flame. He struck at the nearest figure, but his blade passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The creature retaliated, its shadowy limbs lashing out with a force that sent Kale stumbling back. Naida, ever the strategist, quickly assessed the situation. These are not enemies we can fight with steel alone. Leora, we need your magic. Leora nodded, her hands already weaving a complex pattern in the air. She spoke words of power, and the winds began to swirl around them, lifting the shadows and scattering them like leaves in a storm. The shadowy figures recoiled, their forms dissipating under the force of her magic. But the victory was short-lived. More figures emerged from the darkness, their numbers growing with each passing moment. The forest itself seemed to be coming alive, intent on consuming the intruders. Arik, his experience in battle guiding him, called out to the group. Form a circle. We must protect Leora while she works. The heroes quickly moved into position, their backs to each other as they faced the encroaching darkness. Kale's sword blazed with fire, keeping the shadows at bay, while Naida used her command of water to create barriers of ice, slowing the advance of their enemies. Arik his mighty axe, stood ready to strike down any foe that dared come too close. In the center of the circle, Leora focused all her energy on a single point. She could feel the power of the forest, ancient and relentless, pressing down on them. But she also sensed something deeper, something that resonated with the magic of the eternal flame. Drawing upon that connection, Leora unleashed a wave of pure energy, a brilliant light that cut through the darkness like a blade. The shadowy figures screamed in agony as they were consumed by the light, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. For a moment, all was still. The forest, once alive with the sound of battle, was silent once more. The heroes, though battered and weary, had survived the first test of the Veil of Shadows, but their victory came at a cost. As the light faded, Leora collapsed to the ground, her strength spent. Kyle rushed to her side, his concern etched on his face. "Leora, are you all right?" She nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine, just exhausted. The magic here, it's stronger than I expected." Naida, ever pragmatic, spoke up. "We need to keep moving. This place is not safe, even now. We have to find the temple and get out of here." Arik agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. "Let's not waste any more time. We need to find that temple." With Leora leaning on Kale for support, the group continued their journey, the shadows still lurking at the edges of their vision. The encounter had shaken them, but it had also strengthened their resolve. They knew now that the forces they faced were not of this world, and that their mission was more urgent than ever. Hours passed, or perhaps days. It was impossible to tell in the oppressive darkness of the forest. But eventually, they found what they were looking for. The temple stood before them, a massive structure carved from the living rock, its surface covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air around it was thick with magic, a palpable force that seemed to hum with power. Kale, his eyes wide with awe, approached the temple with reverence. "This is it. This is what we've been searching for." Naida, ever cautious, held him back. "Be careful. We don't know what dangers lie within." Arik, his instincts honed by years of battle, scanned the area for any signs of a trap. "Stay alert. This place may hold the answers we seek, but it could also be a tomb." Leora, still weak but determined, stepped forward. The flame's power is here. I can feel it. We must enter. With a deep breath, the heroes crossed the threshold into the temple, leaving the veil of shadows behind. The air inside was cool and dry. The walls lined with intricate carvings that depicted scenes of a time long past. Battles between gods and mortals, the forging of the eternal flame, and the covenant that had bound the kingdoms together. At the center of the temple was an altar, upon which lay a crystal of pure light, a fragment of the eternal flame. Its glow was faint, but it pulsed with a steady rhythm, as if alive. Kale approached the altar, his hand outstretched. This is it. This is what we've been searching for. But before he could touch the crystal, Illyria spoke, her voice urgent. Wait. There's something else. Something hidden beneath the surface. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her magic to probe the crystal. What she found sent a shiver down her spine. This is not just a fragment of the flame. It's a key to a power that should never be unleashed. Arik, his expression grim, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What kind of power? Illyria opened her eyes, her gaze meeting each of theirs in turn. A power that could destroy us all. As the realization dawned on them, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the temple walls shook with a force that threatened to bring the entire structure down around them. The shadows that had pursued them in the forest began to seep through the cracks in the stone, coalescing into a single monstrous form. The heroes barely had time to react before the creature attacked, its massive limbs crashing down with the force of an earthquake. They scattered, each using their abilities to defend themselves, but it was clear that they were outmatched. Kale, his sword blazing with fire, struck at the creature with all his might, but his attacks barely seemed to faze it. Naida called upon the power of the ocean, summoning waves of water to crash against the beast, but it only seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. Arik, his axe in hand, charged at the creature with a roar. But even his mighty strength was no match for the darkness that consumed them. Illyria, her magic drained, could only watch in horror as the creature bore down on them, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. In that moment, as the shadows closed in and all hope seemed lost, a voice echoed through the temple, a voice that seemed to come from the very heart of the flame. Do not despair, for the light of the flame is eternal." With those words, the crystal on the altar flared to life, its light blinding in its intensity. The creature recoiled, its form disintegrating under the force of the flame's power. The heroes, shielded by the light, felt a surge of energy as the flame's magic flowed through them, healing their wounds and renewing their strength. As the last of the shadows faded away, the temple fell silent once more. The crystal on the altar, now glowing with a steady, warm light, pulsed in time with the beating of their hearts. Kyle, his breath coming in ragged gasps, turned to the others. "We did it. We survived." Naida, ever the realist, shook her head. This was only the beginning. Whatever power is hidden within this flame, it's far more dangerous than we could have imagined. Arik, his expression unreadable, nodded in agreement. "We need to understand it, to control it, before it falls into the wrong hands." Leora, her voice soft but resolute, added, "The covenant of the eternal flame is not just a source of power. It's a responsibility. We must protect it, no matter the cost." With renewed determination, the heroes made their way out of the temple, the crystal now safely in their possession. But as they emerged from the veil of shadows, they knew that their journey was far from over. The forces of darkness were still at large, and the true nature of the flame's power had yet to be revealed. But for now, they had taken the first step in a battle that would determine the fate of Illyria. As they looked out over the vast landscape before them, each hero knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous. But they also knew that they were not alone. They had each other, and they had the flame. And with that, they continued their journey, their hearts burning with the light of the eternal flame, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The covenant of the eternal flame. Part 4. The Council of Shadows. The journey out of the Veil of Shadows was a quiet one. The heroes, though triumphant, were weighed down by the gravity of what they had discovered. The crystal they carried was more than just a piece of the eternal flame. It was a key to a power that could reshape the world. And with that power came an immense responsibility, one that none of them had fully anticipated. As they emerged from the dark forest and into the light of day, they found themselves on the outskirts of the neutral city of Lythar, where the rulers of Illyria had agreed to meet in a rare council. The city, once a bustling hub of trade and culture, now seemed subdued, its streets lined with soldiers from each of the kingdoms, all wary of the tension that hung in the air. The heroes made their way to the Grand Hall of Lythar, a massive structure built from stone and adorned with tapestries that depicted the history of Illyria. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The rulers of the four kingdoms had gathered, each surrounded by their most trusted advisors. King Theron of Embers, his fiery presence commanding the room. Queen Seraphine of Tides, her calm demeanor masking the turmoil within. King Auric of Stone, his face a stoic mask. And Queen Lunara of Skies, her eyes filled with the mysteries of the winds. As the heroes entered the hall, all eyes turned to them. The tension was palpable, and it was clear that this meeting was more than just a gathering of leaders. It was a confrontation of ideals, of ambitions, and of the future of Illyria itself. Kale, ever the bold one, stepped forward, holding the crystal aloft. We have found a fragment of the eternal flame, but it is not what we expected. This is more than just a source of power. It's a key to something far greater and far more dangerous. King Theron, his gaze intense, was the first to speak. A key? To what? Leora, her voice steady, answered. To a power that could destroy us all if used recklessly. The flame is not just a weapon. It is a force of creation and destruction. It is tied to the very essence of our world. And if we are not careful, it could bring about our end. Queen Seraphine, ever the voice of reason, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Then what do we do? How do we protect it and ourselves from this power? Before Leora could respond, a new voice echoed through the hall, a voice filled with malice and darkness. You protect it by giving it to me. The room fell silent as a figure stepped out of the shadows, clad in black robes that seemed to absorb the light around them. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood, but the presence was unmistakable. This was the one who had stolen the shard from Embers, the one who had set this chain of events into motion. The figure revealed themselves to be Morvath, a dark sorcerer who had long been thought dead, his name whispered in fear among the people of Illyria. Morvath had once been a powerful mage in the Kingdom of Skies, but his lust for power had led him down a dark path, one that had ended in his exile, or so it was believed. Morvath's voice was like ice, cutting through the tension in the room. The flame is mine by right. I was the one who first sought its power, the one who uncovered its secrets. And now I have returned to claim what is mine. King Theron, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword, growled, "You are nothing but a traitor, a usurper who has no place here." Morvath laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Traitor? Perhaps. But I am also the only one who understands the true nature of the flame. While you bicker among yourselves, the darkness grows stronger. Soon, it will consume everything, and you will be powerless to stop it. Queen Lenara, her voice calm but firm, interjected, "And you believe that you can control this darkness, that you can bend it to your will?" Morvath's eyes glinted with a dangerous light. "I already have." With a wave of his hand, the shadows in the room began to twist and writhe, coalescing into monstrous forms. The guards in the room drew their weapons, but Morvath's creations were too quick, too powerful. The room erupted into chaos as the shadow creatures attacked, their forms shifting and intangible, impossible to strike down with conventional weapons. The rulers and their advisors fought back, but it was clear that Morvath had the upper hand. The shadows were his to command, and with each passing moment, they grew stronger, feeding off the fear and confusion that gripped the room. Kale, his sword igniting with flame, leaped into the fray, striking at the shadows with all his might. Naida, calling upon the power of the ocean, summoned waves of water to douse the flames and drive back the darkness. Arik, his axe gleaming in the dim light, fought with the strength of 10 men, cutting down the shadows that dared to come near him. And Leora, her eyes glowing with the power of the winds, called forth a tempest that whipped through the hall, scattering the shadow creatures. But for every shadow they destroyed, another took its place. Morvath stood at the center of the storm, untouched by the chaos around him, his power growing with each passing moment. It was then that Leora realized the truth. The key they held was not just a key to the flame, but a key to Morvath's power. The flame had been corrupted, twisted by his dark magic. And as long as he held the other shards, he would continue to grow stronger. "We can't win this fight," Leora shouted over the roar of battle. "Not like this! We need to leave, now." Kale, ever the warrior, was reluctant to retreat. But he knew she was right. They were outmatched, and if they stayed, they would be destroyed. "Fall back," he called to the others. We need to regroup. The heroes fought their way to the exit, their powers barely holding back the tide of shadows that threatened to overwhelm them. As they reached the doors, Leora cast one final spell, a blast of wind that sealed the entrance behind them, buying them precious seconds to escape. They fled through the streets of Lythar, the city now a battleground as Morvath's shadows spread like a plague. The once proud neutral city was in ruins, its people fleeing in terror as the darkness consumed everything in its path. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the heroes paused to catch their breath, their bodies bruised and battered, their spirits shaken. They had faced many dangers on their journey, but this was different. Morvath was a threat unlike any they had encountered before, and it was clear that they were not yet strong enough to defeat him. Kael, his face grim, looked back at the city, now engulfed in darkness. We can't just leave them to die. We have to do something. Naida, ever practical, shook her head. We can't help them if we're dead. We need to find a way to counter Morvath's power, and we can't do that here. Arik, his voice filled with determination, added, we need to find the other shards of the flame. If we can reunite them, we might stand a chance. Leora, her mind racing with possibilities, nodded in agreement. The flame is our only hope, but we need to understand it first. We need to learn how to purify it, to break Morvath's hold over it. As the heroes gathered their thoughts, a new plan began to take shape. A plan that would take them across the length and breadth of Illyria in search of the remaining shards of the eternal flame. They knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they also knew that they could not turn back. With renewed resolve, the heroes set out once more, leaving the ruined city of Lythar behind. Their journey would take them to the farthest corners of the realm, through lands both familiar and unknown, in a race against time to stop Morvath before his darkness consumed the world. But even as they marched forward, they knew that the shadows were never far behind. Morvath's reach was long, and his power was growing with each passing day. The covenant of the eternal flame, once a symbol of hope and unity, had become a battleground, a prize that all would fight for, but only one could claim. And so, with the fate of Illyria hanging in the balance, the heroes embarked on the next chapter of their journey, their hearts burning with the light of the eternal flame, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The covenant of the eternal flame. Part 5. The hunt for the shards. The heroes pressed on, their path taking them through the diverse and treacherous landscapes of Illyria. Each step brought them closer to the remaining shards of the eternal flame, but it also brought them deeper into danger. Morvath's influence was spreading, and the darkness he commanded seemed to reach every corner of the realm. Their first destination was the Kingdom of Stone, where the next shard was said to be hidden deep within the mountains. The journey to Stone was arduous, the terrain unforgiving, but it was nothing compared to the challenges that awaited them within the kingdom's borders. As they approached the mountain stronghold, they were met with a grim sight. The once mighty kingdom, known for its impregnable defenses and sturdy fortresses, was now a shadow of its former self. The great walls were crumbling, and the cities were filled with fear and uncertainty. The people of Stone, once proud and unyielding, were now living in the shadow of Morvath's growing power. King Arik, who had led them through these lands, could hardly recognize his own kingdom. The sight of his people suffering, their spirits broken, filled him with a sense of deep sorrow and anger. But it also strengthened his resolve. He knew that they had no choice but to push forward and reclaim the shard that lay hidden within the mountains. Their journey led them to the deepest part of the kingdom, to a place known as the Black Gorge. It was said that the shard of the eternal flame was hidden within the gorge, protected by ancient wards and powerful guardians. But the gorge was also a place of great danger, filled with creatures born of the darkness that had begun to seep into the land. The entrance to the gorge was marked by two towering statues, their features worn by time, but still exuding a sense of power and menace. As the heroes stood before the entrance, the air around them seemed to thicken with magic, a heavy, oppressive force that pressed down on them like a physical weight. Leora, her senses attuned to the magic in the air, spoke first. The wards here are strong, but they have been weakened. Morvath's influence is spreading even here. Kale, ever the warrior, gripped his sword tightly. Then we must move quickly. We can't afford to let him get to the shard before we do. Naida, always the strategist, nodded in agreement. But we must be careful. The gorge is a place of great power and great danger. We need to stay together and watch each other's backs. With a shared look of determination, the heroes entered the gorge. The path was narrow and winding, with the walls of the gorge towering high above them, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift with a life of their own. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until the light from the sky above was nothing more than a distant memory. As they descended further into the depths of the gorge, they encountered the first of the guardians. Massive stone golems, their forms shaped by ancient magic, stood sentinel along the path. Their eyes, glowing with an eerie light, watched the heroes with a cold, unblinking gaze. Kale, ever the bold one, stepped forward to face the first golem. "We don't have time for this. We need to get to the shard." But as he moved to strike, the golem's eyes flared with light, and it moved with surprising speed, its massive stone fist swinging toward him. Kale barely had time to dodge, the force of the blow sending shockwaves through the ground. Naida, quick to react, called upon the power of water, sending a torrent of ice-cold water crashing into the golem. The water struck with the force of a tidal wave, but the golem merely shrugged it off, its stone body impervious to the elemental attack. Arik, drawing upon his knowledge of the kingdom's ancient defenses, shouted to the others. These golems were created to protect the shard from those who would misuse it. We can't fight them with brute force alone. We need to outsmart them. Leora, her mind racing, quickly analyzed the situation. The golems are bound by the wards that protect the shard. If we can disrupt the wards, we can weaken them. She began to chant, her voice weaving a complex spell that resonated with the magic of the gorge. The air around them shimmered as the wards began to shift, their power realigning in response to Leora's magic. The golems, sensing the disruption, grew more aggressive, their movements becoming faster and more erratic. But Leora persisted, her focus unbroken as she continued to unravel the wards that bound the golems. Finally, with a final surge of magic, the wards shattered, and the golems froze in place, their power broken. The path to the shard was now clear, but the effort had taken its toll on Leora. She staggered, her strength nearly spent. Kale rushed to her side, his concern evident. "Leora, are you all right?" She nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine. Just tired. We need to move quickly before the wards re-establish themselves." With Leora leaning on Kale for support, the group pressed on, deeper into the gorge. The air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive, as they neared the heart of the gorge, where the shard was said to be hidden. Finally, they reached the inner sanctum of the gorge, a vast cavern illuminated by a soft, otherworldly light. At the center of the cavern, suspended in mid-air by a network of glowing magical runes, was the shard of the eternal flame. The shard pulsed with a deep inner light, its power radiating out in waves that filled the cavern with warmth and energy. But there was also something else, a dark, malevolent presence that seemed to cling to the shard like a shadow. Kale, his eyes fixed on the shard, approached cautiously. This is it, the shard of stone. But before he could reach it, the darkness around the shard began to take shape, coalescing into a figure that was both familiar and terrifying. It was Morvath, or rather, a shadow of him, projected through the shard. "Fools," the shadow sneered. "Did you really think you could outrun me? The flame is mine, and no matter where you go, I will be there to claim it." The heroes drew their weapons, ready to fight, but the shadow merely laughed. "You cannot defeat me here. This shard is already mine, corrupted by my magic. But go ahead, try to take it. See what happens." Leora, her mind racing, realized the trap. If we take the shard now, we'll only be playing into his hands. The corruption will spread to the other shards, and Morvath will grow even stronger. Naida, ever the voice of reason, added, "We can't leave it here either. If we do, Morvath will use it to destroy stone, and the rest of Illyria will follow." Arik, his face grim, made a decision. "We need to purify the shard. If we can cleanse it of Morvath's influence, we can use its power to fight him." Kael, his determination unshaken, nodded. "Then let's do it." Leora, drawing upon the last of her strength, began to cast a purification spell, her voice echoing through the cavern. The runes around the shard flared with light, and the darkness clinging to it began to recede, its hold weakening. But the shadow of Morvath was not so easily defeated. He lashed out with a wave of dark magic, trying to break Leora's concentration. But Kael and the others were ready. They formed a protective barrier around her, using their combined powers to shield her from the shadow's attacks. The battle was fierce, the air crackling with magic as the heroes fought to keep the shadow at bay, while Leora worked to purify the shard. The shadow's power was immense, but the heroes were relentless, their determination unwavering. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the purification spell took hold. The shard glowed with a pure white light. The darkness that had clung to it vanished by the power of the flame. The shadow of Morvath, weakened and enraged, let out a howl of fury before dissipating into nothingness. The cavern was silent once more, the shard now free of corruption, its power restored. Leora, exhausted but triumphant, smiled faintly. It's done. The shard is ours. Kale, his eyes filled with admiration, helped her to her feet. You did it, Leora. We all did. Naida, ever the pragmatist, reminded them of the task ahead. This is just one shard. We still have more to find, and Morvath won't give up so easily. Arik, his expression resolute, agreed. We need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the stronger Morvath will become. With the shard of stone safely in their possession, the heroes left the gorge, their hearts filled with renewed hope. But they knew that the journey ahead would be even more difficult, and that the stakes were higher than ever. As they made their way back through the kingdom, the people of stone, seeing the shard in their possession, began to emerge from their homes, their fear slowly giving way to hope. Word of their victory spread quickly, and soon the kingdom was alive with the sounds of celebration. But the heroes could not stay to join in the festivities. Their journey was far from over, and they knew that the fate of Illyria depended on their success. With the shard of stone in hand, they set out for their next destination, the Kingdom of Skies, where the final shard awaited. But as they left the Kingdom of Stone behind, they knew that the true battle was only just beginning. For Morvath was still out there, his power growing with each passing day. And the final confrontation, the one that would decide the fate of the world, was drawing ever closer, the covenant of the eternal flame. Part 6. The Winds of Destiny. With the shard of stone securely in their possession, the heroes turned their sights toward the Kingdom of Skies, where the final shard of the eternal flame awaited. The journey to Skies was one that would take them to the very edge of Illyria, high above the clouds, where the air was thin and the winds spoke in whispers of forgotten secrets. As they traveled, the land beneath them grew increasingly desolate, a stark reminder of the toll that Morvath's darkness had taken on the world. Once fertile fields were now barren. Rivers that had once teemed with life were dry, and the skies were filled with a perpetual gray haze that that seemed to choke the very life out of the land. The kingdom of skies had always been a place of mystery, its people living in harmony with the winds and the storms that swept through their mountainous homeland. But now, even the winds seemed to carry a note of despair, as if the very elements themselves had been corrupted by the spreading darkness. Queen Lunara, who had ruled over skies with a wisdom and grace that was unmatched, was a ruler who understood the power of the elements better than anyone. She had always been attuned to the forces of nature, and it was said that the winds themselves obeyed her commands. But even she could not ignore the signs of the coming storm, a storm that threatened to engulf her kingdom in shadow. As the heroes approached the kingdom's capital, Erelon, they were greeted by a sight that filled them with dread. The once majestic city, built into the peaks of the highest mountains, was now a fortress under siege. The winds that had once been a source of life and power for the people of skies were now wild and uncontrollable, whipping through the city with a ferocity that left destruction in their wake. The people of Erelon, once known for their calm and serenity, were now gripped by fear. They huddled in their homes, their eyes turned to the skies as they awaited the next onslaught of the storm. The city's defenders, warriors trained in the art of aerial combat, were spread thin, their efforts focused on protecting the city from the relentless winds. As the heroes made their way through the city, they were struck by the scale of the devastation. Buildings had been reduced to rubble. The once pristine gardens were torn apart, and the very air was thick with the scent of ozone and despair. Kale, his heart heavy with the sight of so much suffering, turned to Leora. "We need to find Queen Lunara. If anyone can help us, it's her." Leora, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the magic in the air, nodded. "She's in the Tempest Tower, at the heart of the city. But be careful. The winds here are not natural. They're being manipulated by a force I can't fully understand." Naida, ever the strategist, added, "We need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more damage Morvath's influence will cause." With renewed determination, the heroes made their way to the Tempest Tower, the tallest structure in Erelon, its spires reaching up into the clouds. The tower was a place of great power, built to harness the energy of the winds and storms that swept through the kingdom. But now, that power had been turned against them. As they approached the tower, they were met with resistance. The winds howled around them, forming barriers of air that were nearly impossible to penetrate. But the heroes were not easily deterred. Kale, his sword blazing with fire, cut through the winds with sheer force, while Nida used her command of water to create a protective barrier around them, shielding them from the worst of the storm's fury. Arik, drawing upon his strength and experience, led the charge, his axe cleaving through the air as if it were solid matter. Leora, her connection to the winds of skies, began to chant, her voice rising above the roar of the storm. Her magic, attuned to the very essence of the kingdom, began to calm the winds, creating a path for the heroes to reach the tower. Inside the Tempest Tower, they found Queen Lunara standing at the center of a massive chamber, her arms outstretched as she fought to maintain control over the raging storm. Her eyes were closed in concentration, her face a mask of serenity despite the chaos that surrounded her. "Lunara!" Kale called out, his voice barely audible over the roar of the winds. "We need your help." Lunara's eyes opened, and for a moment they glowed with a light that seemed to come from within. She lowered her arms, and the winds in the chamber began to die down, the storm outside abating slightly as her influence took hold. "You've come," Lunara said, her voice calm but tinged with weariness. "I feared you might not make it in time." Naida, always direct, spoke quickly. "Morvath is growing stronger. He's already corrupted the shards of embers and stone. We need to secure the shard of skies before he can get to it." Lunara nodded, her expression grave. "The shard is here, within the tower, but it is not safe. The winds that have protected us for so long have turned against us, and I fear that Morvath's influence is already at work." Leora, her voice steady, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Can we purify it, like we did with the shard of stone?" Lunara considered this for a moment, then nodded. "It is possible, but it will not be easy. The shard of skies is tied to the very heart of the kingdom, to the winds and storms that give us life. To purify it, we must calm the storm outside, to bring the winds back under control." Kale, ever the warrior, was ready for action. "Then let's do it. Tell us what we need to do." Lunara led them to the top of the tower, where the shard of skies was kept in a chamber open to the elements. The shard, a crystal of pure blue light, floated in the center of the chamber, surrounded by swirling winds that crackled with energy. As they approached the shard, the winds grew more intense, pushing them back with a force that was almost impossible to resist. But the heroes pressed on, their determination unshaken. Leora, her voice firm, began to chant the purification spell, drawing upon the power of the winds that surrounded them. But this time, the task was far more difficult. The shard was deeply connected to the kingdom, and the corruption that had taken hold was strong. The winds howled in defiance, resisting the purification with all their might. The storm outside grew even more violent, the skies darkening as lightning flashed across the horizon. Kael, using all his strength, stood firm against the winds, his sword blazing as he cut through the air. Naida, her focus unwavering, used her command of water to channel the energy of the storm, redirecting it away from the shard. Arik, his face a mask of determination, stood guard, ready to strike down any threat that might arise. But it was Leora who bore the brunt of the battle, her voice rising above the storm as she poured all her magic into the purification spell. The winds lashed out at her, tearing at her clothes, her skin, her very soul. But she did not falter. She knew that this was their only chance, that if they failed here, all would be lost. Lunara, seeing Leora's struggle, joined her in the spell, her own voice blending with Leora's as they fought to cleanse the shard. The two of them, drawing upon the combined power of the winds and the flame, began to push back the corruption, slowly but surely. Finally, with a burst of light that illuminated the entire chamber, the purification took hold. The shard of skies glowed with a pure blue light, its energy no longer tainted by Morvath's darkness. The winds around them calmed, the storm outside abating as the shard was cleansed. Leora, exhausted but triumphant, fell to her knees, her strength spent. Kael was at her side in an instant, his face filled with concern. Leora, are you all right? She nodded weakly, a faint smile on her lips. We did it. The shard is ours. Lunara, her face serene but determined, spoke softly. You have done what I could not. You have saved my kingdom, but the battle is not yet over. Morvath will not stop until he has claimed all the shards. We must act quickly before he can strike again. Naida, ever the strategist, nodded in agreement. We need to unite the shards. It's only way to stop him. Arik, his voice filled with resolve, added, "We need to return to the place where the flame was first forged. It's the only place where we can truly harness its power." With the shard of skies in hand, the heroes knew that the final battle was drawing near. They had come so far, faced so many challenges, but the greatest test was yet to come. As they prepared to leave Erelon, the people of skies, seeing the shard in their possession, began to gather. The winds, now calm and gentle, carried the news of their victory across the kingdom. The once fearful citizens now looked to the heroes with hope in their eyes, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that the flame was still strong. But the heroes could not afford to linger. The final shard awaited them, and with it, the fate of Illyria. With the winds at their backs, they set out for their final destination, the place where the eternal flame had first been forged, the heart of the world itself. And as they journeyed toward their destiny, they knew that the true battle was just beginning. For Morvath was still out there, his power growing with each passing day, and the darkness that he commanded would not be easily defeated. But the heroes were not alone. They carried with them the light of the eternal flame, a light that would guide them through the darkest of times and lead them to victory. For in the end, it was not the power of the flame that would decide the fate of Illyria. It was the courage, the determination, and the unity of those who fought to protect it. And so, with the wind in their sails and the flame in their hearts, they marched toward the final battle, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, the covenant of the eternal flame. Part 7. The final confrontation. The journey to the place where the eternal flame had first been forged was long and arduous, but the heroes pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of Illyria hung in the balance. The land they traveled through was desolate, scarred by the battles that had been fought and the darkness that had spread across the realm. But despite the devastation, there was a sense of hope, a belief that they could still turn the tide and save their world. Their destination was the heart of Illyria, a place of ancient power, hidden deep within the mountains that lay at the center of the realm. It was said that this was where the gods had first created the world, where the elements had been bound together in harmony, and where the eternal flame had been born. As they neared the heart, the air grew thick with magic, the very ground beneath their feet pulsing with energy. The mountains loomed above them, their peaks peaks shrouded in mist, and the path before them was treacherous, lined with jagged rocks and deep chasms. But the heroes were undeterred. They had faced countless dangers on their journey, and they knew that this was the final test, the ultimate challenge that would determine the fate of everything they held dear. At last, they reached the entrance to the heart, a massive cavern that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth. The air inside was charged with power, the walls glowing with faint traces of the ancient runes that had been etched into the stone by the gods themselves. As they stepped into the cavern, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. The chamber at the center of the heart was vast, its ceiling rising high above them, disappearing into the darkness. In the center of the chamber was a massive altar, carved from the living rock, and upon it burned the eternal flame. But the flame was not as they had expected. It flickered weakly, its light dim and unsteady, as if struggling to survive. The shards they had gathered glowed faintly, resonating with the flame's energy, but it was clear that something was wrong. And then, from the shadows, Morvath emerged. He stood at the edge of the chamber, his dark robes billowing around him, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. In his hand, he held the final shard of the eternal flame, its dark energy pulsating with power. "You have done well to come this far," Morvath said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "But it is all for naught. The flame belongs to me, and with it, I will reshape this world in my image." Kale, his sword blazing with fire, stepped forward, his voice filled with determination. "We won't let you do this, Morvath. The flame is not yours to control." Morvath laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down their spines. "You still don't understand, do you? The flame is more than just a source of power. It is the very essence of life itself. And I have harnessed that power, twisted it to my will. You cannot hope to defeat me." Leora, her eyes filled with resolve, spoke next. "The flame may be powerful, but it is not meant to be controlled by one man. It was created to bring balance, to unite the elements and protect this world. You are corrupting it, and in doing so, you are destroying everything it stands for." Morvath's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "Enough of your prattle. If you will not join me, then you will be destroyed." With a wave of his hand, the final shard in his possession flared to life, and the shadows in the chamber began began to twist and writhe, coalescing into monstrous forms. The heroes drew their weapons, ready to fight. But they knew that this battle would be unlike any they had faced before. The chamber erupted into chaos as the shadow creatures attacked, their forms shifting and intangible, impossible to strike down with conventional weapons. Kael, his sword ablaze, fought with all his might, cutting through the shadows with fire and fury. Naida, using her command of water, created barriers of ice to slow the creature's advance. But they kept coming, relentless and unyielding. Arik, his axe gleaming in the dim light, fought with the strength of 10 men. But even he was hard-pressed to hold the line. Leora, her magic nearly spent, struggled to keep the shadows at bay, her voice hoarse from the constant chanting of spells. And through it all, Morvath stood at the edge of the chamber, his eyes glowing with dark power as he directed the shadows, his laughter echoing through the cavern. The battle seemed hopeless, the heroes outmatched and outnumbered. But just as all seemed lost, Leora sensed something. A faint pulse of energy from the shards they had gathered. It was as if the flame itself was reaching out to them, offering them the strength they needed to fight back. "We need to unite the shards!" Leora shouted over the din of battle. "It's the only way to stop him." Kael, understanding immediately, nodded. "Cover me." With a burst of speed, Kael made a dash for the altar at the center of the chamber, the shards glowing brightly in his hands. The shadows tried to stop him, but Naida and Arik fought them off, buying Kael the time he needed. As Kael reached the altar, he placed the shards around the flame, their light merging with the flickering fire. The chamber was filled with a blinding light as the flame flared to life, its power surging through the room. Morvath, sensing the shift in power, let out a roar of rage. "No, you cannot defeat me." But it was too late. The light from the flame grew brighter and brighter, driving back the shadows and illuminating the entire chamber. The power of the flame, united and pure, was too much for Morvath to control. His hold on the final shard began to weaken, the dark energy dissipating as the light of the flame burned away the corruption. Leora, her voice filled with determination, began to chant the final spell, a spell of purification that would cleanse the flame and banish Morvath's darkness once and for all. The others joined in, their voices rising in unison as they channeled the power of the flame. The light in the chamber intensified, and with a final deafening roar, the shadows were obliterated, and Morvath was consumed by the very power he had sought to control. The chamber fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the eternal flame as it burned brightly once more. The heroes, exhausted but victorious, stood together at the altar, their faces illuminated by the warm, golden light of the flame. "It's over," Kale said softly, his voice filled with relief. Leora nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "The flame is restored. The balance is returned." Naida, ever the pragmatist, added, "But the cost was high. Morvath may be gone, but the damage he caused will take time to heal." Arik, his face somber, agreed. "Illyria has been through much, but we have the flame. We can rebuild." As they stood together, the light of the flame pulsing with life, they knew that their journey was not yet over. There was still much to be done, much to rebuild, and many wounds to heal. But they had done what they had set out to do. They had saved their world from darkness, and they had restored the eternal flame to its rightful place. And with that, they knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The eternal flame burned brightly, its light a beacon of hope for all of Illyria. The heroes had fought bravely, and they had emerged victorious, but they knew that the true strength of the flame lay not in its power, but in the unity and courage of those who fought to protect it. As they left the heart of Illyria, the sun began to rise, casting its golden light across the land. The darkness that had once threatened to consume the world was gone, and in its place, a new day was dawning. And so, with the light of the eternal flame in their hearts, the heroes set out to rebuild their world, knowing that as long as the flame burned, there would always be hope.